what are your benchmarks? What are your inspirations slash benchmarks in terms of trans representation in world cinema?
Um, it's hard for me because a lot of, to find kind of landmark films about the trans experience or featuring trans characters, because most of what I've seen so far are made by cisgender, you know, male directors. One key or seminal work for me that's not ostensibly about a trans character that influenced me to with my own transition and as a filmmaker is the movie Clute, by Alan J. Pakula and starring Jane Fonda, and she plays an escort there. And what I just like about the film was how nuanced and complex and multi-layered her character is. And that's the kind of portrayal and characterization I would want to see more about, for transgender characters in cinema, especially Philippine cinema. I mean, we don't have to be perfect or angelic or idealized, but we have to thrum with the pulse and the energy of real life. Mhm.
Let's talk about lingua franca.
As I was experiencing the psychological, physical, and emotional changes of what it's like to transition, I came up with a premise for Lingua Franca and started writing it in 2015. Initially, it was more of a straightforward romantic drama about a Filipino trans woman in New York City who becomes emotionally involved with a cisgender man who is not aware that she's transgender. And halfway through writing the script, Trump got elected to the White House. And that was when, yeah, Lingua Franca came together as a narrative. And the prevailing mood and atmosphere of the film is really a distillation of my emotional and mental state during those first few months of the Trump administration. I've said that it's not autobiographical, but it's still a very personal film to me because it's a subjective and impressionistic film. It tries to put the audience into kind of the mindset of someone like Olivia.
What scene in lingua franca would you say was the most complicated to shoot?
There are a few emotionally intense and harrowing scenes, like the emotional breakdown and also the sex scene, for instance. It wasn't technically complicated to shoot on its own, but I've never shot a sex scene before. Like I've never shown a boob before. So crazy. Um, but after shooting that scene, I was like hounded by it. Like I was disturbed that I even shot that because even though it was just, me and Eamon Farron, the DP, and my assistant director in that room, I just felt vulnerable and exposed in a way that I never felt before. And to have the audacity to shoot it on the very first day of the shoot, I felt like, funnily enough, that I hashtag me too'd myself. But I can't blame anyone else because I'm the director and I'm the one who wrote the scene and wanted to shoot it.
So there's two love scenes. One is a fantasy uh,
Mm-hmm.
sequence, and then the other one is a real love scene, sex
Mm-hmm.
scene. And can you talk about how you treated that as a director? What was your main goal in depicting those scenes? What did
Yeah,
you want for that?
yeah. For me, my goal was really not, because sex scenes tend to be, just shots of naked bodies or body parts gyrating against each other and going sweaty, and these shots of like faces and, orgasmic ecstasy. But for me, I wanted it to be about her desire and putting Olivia's, desire front and center for that scene. And I also wanted the scene to feel more like a character scene for her, because there first there tends to be an obsession and fixation with a naked trans body, and I didn't want to indulge that, I think, perverse fascination from a cisgender audience, but I wanted to have it be a sensual scene that just focuses for the most part on her face, and the audience seeing her allowing herself to slowly and permitting herself to experience sexual pleasure, but also witness in her face the dawning realization and the sense of anxiety about becoming physically intimate with a man who might not be aware that she's transgender. And so I feel like I accomplished two things, and like having it in in a certain way about seeing a trans woman desiring. And I feel like there is such an assertion of selfhood and personhood in that. Um, and second, just to see this trans woman also thinking.
Was there at any point that you imagined a happier outcome for the two of them, for example?
A happier romantic ending was definitely one option that I'd considered, but I also ultimately wanted it to be about Olivia's sense of dignity and agency. On the one hand, she could accept Alex's offer, as problematic as he is, as troubled as he is. But then, if I put myself in Olivia's shoes, would I really want to marry a man who exploited my deepest fears and deepest anxieties, and gaslit me as a way to um, retaliate against me, for for my perceived betrayal of him after we discovered that I was trans? Or and it's that at that moment when Olivia turns him down that the audience realizes that her end goal was not necessarily just getting out of her predicament, as an undocumented immigrant. It becomes more about, yeah, her wanting her agency back.
About Lingua Franca shoot. You shot it in 16 days. I think that's amazing, considering that you just said that you sometimes you end shoots, a shooting day before midnight, but you
Yeah.
shot it for 16 days, and that's quite quite fast compared to most American productions. Can you share with us how were you able to pull that off?
Yeah, I'd like to think I'm an efficient director. Before I go on set, I have a clear idea of, how I want to shoot the scenes. And I'm also an um, economical storyteller. I don't like to do tons and tons of shots for a scene. I try to get to the essence of a scene and determine what shots really are needed to convey what I'm trying to say as a filmmaker. And yeah, I don't dawdle. When I'm on set, I'm ready and prepped, and I think that sense of clear direction rubs off on the crew. I'm also an easygoing director when I'm on set. I'm not the type to like yell and throw my weight around just to show them who's boss. I don't think that accomplishes anything really. And I think as a director, you're really more of a conductor of an orchestra, and you're responsible for setting the morale on set. And it's funny because between this and Apparition, which are both heavy films, the atmosphere on set is rather relatively upbeat, and that is why we accomplished everything.
What are you hoping for with the Philippine release of Lingua Franca? What are your thoughts and what are you hoping for with the Philippine release?
Certainly. I, one of the reasons why I started making films, and with Senorita, for instance, my first feature, which is also about a trans woman, but that was before I transitioned. So I tested the waters, whether I was trans by making that film, is that, you know, I would hopefully this film inspires and emboldens more queer and trans filmmakers to write trans characters that are complex and three-dimensional. We can be flawed and imperfect, but I would want us to be multifaceted and humane. And that is what I sought to accomplish in Lingua Franca. And I think that's what resonates with the audiences that have embraced the film. And, it touches on immigration and the transgender experience in the US. And I'm not trying to espouse any simplistic solutions to that situation, which continues to be unresolved. But I would hope that a subtle, nuanced film like Lingua Franca would encourage people to think more deeply and more critically about these issues.